Op-ed: Why Europe's EV Incentives Work Better Than America's. The views expressed in this commentary are those of the author and do not necessarily reflect the views of Environment+Energy leader. Today's industry voice comes from Atish Patel, the president of X-Charge North America. The United States and Europe are both trying to electrify transportation. Only one of them is designing policy for how people actually live. American EV policy is built around an almost childish oversimplification. Lower the sticker price at the car dealership so that consumers won't be able to resist leaping into a new technology. Europe's approach is less romantic and far more effective. Instead of fixating on the checkout counter, European governments embed EVs into the financial systems people already use: payroll, fleet budgets, tax treatment, and operating expenses. One model tries to force demand. The other unobtrusively makes adoption the path of least resistance. The results are visible in adoption curves, utilization rates, and, just as importantly, political durability. America's model: subsidize the transaction period. U.S. EV incentives are overwhelmingly front-loaded. The Inflation Reduction Act doubled down on point-of-sale logic through consumer credits and commercial credits, governed by income caps, battery sourcing rules, final assembly requirements, and shifting eligibility guidance that regularly changes who qualifies and why. This architecture assumes the barrier to adoption is price at checkout. In practice, it produces three entirely predictable outcomes. For one thing, complexity suppresses participation. When a person goes to a car lot, they typically want to buy a car, not receive a lesson in global economics. But dealers are expected to accurately explain eligibility rules tied to battery minerals and assembly geography, and customers are expected to want to understand them. When adoption lags, policymakers blame consumer confusion, as though that confusion were incidental or surprising, rather than an obvious structural bug. Secondly, leasing has surged, but not due to strategy. Markets tend to find a way to root around bad policy design. Section 45(2) allows leased EVs to qualify as commercial vehicles, bypassing many consumer-side restrictions. Leasing volumes jumped accordingly, especially for imported models. Later, the policy was retroactively framed as a loophole once the outcome became politically inconvenient. Third, transactional subsidies invite backlash, especially in America. Highly visible tax credits tied to individual purchases are easy to caricature as elitist or wasteful, even when their macroeconomic effects are positive. That visibility has made EV incentives perennial political targets, despite evidence that repealing them would raise household energy expenses and cost jobs. The result is a system that spends heavily, converts unevenly, places EVs squarely within the culture war crosshairs, and keeps them there. Europe's model: subsidize participation. Europe approached the same problem with less theater and more systems thinking. Rather than asking consumers to make a large symbolic purchase up front, many European countries focused on embedding EVs into existing financial systems that everyday people already use, specifically payroll, benefits, and tax treatment. In salary sacrifice schemes, which are common in the UK, Germany, and the Netherlands, an employee can lease an electric vehicle through their employer instead of buying one outright. The monthly lease payment is automatically deducted from that employee's gross salary before income tax, which both reduces the effective cost of the vehicle and lowers that employee's taxable income. Insurance and maintenance, and increasingly home or office charging, are bundled into a single monthly payment. This makes leasing an EV indistinguishable from any other employee benefit like health insurance. This means that opting to drive an EV is a benefits choice with predictable monthly costs, rather than a large capital expense or lifestyle change. Europe has also leaned heavily on corporate fleets, which account for a far larger share of new vehicle registrations than in the US. Governments in Europe incentivize companies to electrify their fleets through preferential tax treatment for low-emission company cars. Fleet vehicles are replaced on predictable schedules every few years, driven more miles, and centrally managed, creating immediate utilization rather than speculation. Just as important, when their time is up, fleet vehicles enter the used car market. This means there's a reliable supply of affordable second-hand EVs for those who are interested, but not enough to be an early adopter. Some countries have gone further still by decoupling electrification from ownership entirely. France's social leasing pilot targets lower-income households that would never qualify for a new car loan, offering long-term EV leases at heavily subsidized monthly rates. This reframes electrification as access to mobility rather than acquisition of a new technology. Demand exceeded expectations precisely because monthly affordability, not sticker price, was the organizing principle. Across these programs, the pattern is clear. Europe stopped trying to persuade consumers and started enrolling participants. Stability versus volatility. The market outcomes reflect this difference in design. European adoption has been steadier and less politically fragile, even as individual countries adjust incentive levels. Where policy changes have been abrupt, as in Germany, EV sales dropped sharply, illustrating the cost of inconsistency rather than a lack of consumer interest. Norway illustrates the opposite dynamic. Long-running, participation-focused incentives normalized EVs before politicizing them. By the time benefits were scaled back, the market had momentum of its own. In the United States, EVs remain symbolically loaded identity signifiers, precisely because policy continues to frame them as exceptional, subsidized purchases rather than ordinary vehicles. The uncomfortable lesson for the United States: the problem with American EV policy isn't ambition, it's drama. We keep designing incentives as if buying a car were a political statement, something that requires persuasion or belief. But transportation isn't a political act. It's a routine one. It's how people get to work, take their kids to school, or go grocery shopping. Europe's incentives work because they understand this reality. They remove symbolism from the equation of buying a new car and embed EVs where ordinary economic life already happens. Payroll, benefits, company fleets, and so on. Systems built on a routine scale sensibly. Systems built on symbolism fracture under politics. America subsidizes transactions and keeps EVs exceptional. Europe subsidizes participation and makes it boring. If the goal is mass adoption, boring beats dramatic every time.